Hey guys, today I'm going to do a Man Booker 2017 review on Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. He's an established American short story writer, but this is his first novel, and it's extremely unconventional, which I'll get into in a little bit. I've seen three main camps of reactions to this book. The first camp doesn't like it at all, either because they didn't click with it, or they think it's pretentious, or both. The second camp likes some aspects of it, but feels that the form distracts more than it adds. And the third camp thinks it's brilliant and heaps praise on it. So the question is, which camp am I in? I think it's brilliant. I loved this book. And it's really the ideal combination in that I think it's so good. And I also feel a real personal affection for it. So I thought I'd warn you for any people in the first two camps who are tired of people yammering on about how wonderful this book is. I won't be offended if you click away. I get it because I will be stacking praise to the roof beams. The original inspiration for this book was that Saunders heard the story of how, after his son's death, Abraham Lincoln went to his crypt several times to hold his body. It was his middle son, Willie, who died at the age of 11 from typhoid fever, and reports are that Lincoln never fully recovered from his death and that his wife Mary certainly never did. So this takes place over the course of one night in the graveyard where Willie's body is lying. And he and the other inhabitants of the graveyard are in this state called the bardo. In certain strains of Buddhism, it's an intermediate state between death and rebirth. So your old consciousness still exists, but you don't have a body anymore. And Saunders takes full advantage of that fact, which I'll talk about later. This is told as a chorus of voices from dozens of people, most of whom are in the bardo, and we have two main characters who lead us through the night, Hans Vollmann and Roger Bevins III. This is what the text looks like. I'm going to give you a close-up. So for the most part, you're not getting traditional paragraphs. You get a little bit of speech, the name of the speaker, and it jumps from voice to voice. When something is as hyped as this book, you're waiting for lightning bolts, right? You're waiting to be hit with how amazing it is. But this book really snuck up on me, partially because the form definitely took some getting used to. The book opens by having us learn about Hans and Roger's deaths, but things are jumping around and you're being inundated with voices, and I was finding it hard to keep their stories straight, like which one was Hans and which one was Roger, which wasn't totally necessary to distinguish for a lot of the book, but I just felt weirdly unanchored to characters while I was figuring out how to read this form. And it took me a while to figure out that the character that was speaking had their name after the speech, not before, so I had to go back and reread some pages. But even in the beginning, when I was slipping and sliding, I was more curious about the form than frustrated by it, and boy, did it pay off to stick with it, because some kind of alchemy happened, and I blinked and was 100 pages in, wasn't consciously thinking about the form anymore, and was just enjoying the ride. This book is a trip. It has so much energy and zest. Saunders has this great description of how all these ghosts move. He calls it run skimming, and I felt like my brain was run skimming. I could feel it getting more nimble and letting go of wanting paragraphs, just flitting around. And the format achieves so much. So one thing is that it creates this wonderful feeling of banter, and when you get rid of all the he said junk, the tempo picks up and the funny lines and the piggybacked responses come at you faster. So yes, the structure is inherently chaotic, but it's controlled chaos, and I think what Saunders is really doing in here is making you appreciate two paradoxical things. One is how fleeting our connections are with the vast majority of people that we interact with throughout our lives, how little we know about a person through brief contact, and despite that, how many assumptions we all haphazardly make about each other. So that's one part. But he also shows you how much you can learn about a person just by actively listening for a few minutes, taking the time to let someone stumble through his or her story. And we do get sections in here where the tempo slows down and one character gets to talk for paragraphs or pages. And every instance of that feels like such a gift. And it is, and I think that's one of Saunders' points. Some of those sections of Lincoln in the Bardo maintain the basic form, but are from newspapers or personal journals or biographies of Lincoln. Those look like this. So you actually get the citations, which I started to find obtrusive, and I didn't read those carefully. But these sections flesh out the political and personal circumstances surrounding the Lincolns at the time of Willie's death. So you get all different accounts of the night Willie died, of Willie's character, of how the press was covering the Civil War at the time, and plenty of these accounts contradict each other or claim to be factual but are transparently subjective. So, for example, the Lincolns were famously lenient with their children, and Willie had recently gotten a pony and was allowed to ride it out in all kinds of weather. So after his death, a lot of people blamed the Lincolns, and they said, you should have been stricter parents. You should have known that he would get a fever from riding his pony in the rain. When in fact, Willie Lincoln probably contracted typhoid fever from the drinking water in Washington, D.C. So all these voices just remind you of how much humans want to make sense of things because it gives you the illusion of control. You can say, this happened because of this, and that would never happen to my children. And we rarely acknowledge how limited our individual perspectives really are. Saunders illustrates this again in a section with all different accounts of Lincoln's eyes. Some people say they were brown, some green, some bluish gray. They all seem perfectly confident in their memories, and it's like, how can there be disagreement about this? Like, isn't this a concrete thing? But Saunders is nudging the reader to say that his own portrait of Abraham Lincoln will be arbitrary, just like any other. But that being said, his portrait is beautiful and spare and leaves you with a powerful impression of Lincoln's morality and strength and doubts with very few details. In general, I was amazed by how economical this book is while still feeling generous. There's a scene when Lincoln is in the graveyard and memories of Willie keep stealing into his mind, and one of them is of when Willie was fitted for his first suit, and he felt so fine in his grown-up pants, and Lincoln thinks about his little white belly sticking out before they buttoned up his shirt, and like, oh God, this part destroyed me. It was so simple and moving. And there's another part when Lincoln is convincing himself that his son doesn't exist in his body anymore, and it's time to leave the crypt. So he thinks, all gifts are temporary. I unwillingly surrendered this one. And at the end of the paragraph he says, love, love, I know what you are. Which, like, you can see it every time I read that line. It's, like, very emotional for me. But that being said, this book is also really funny and bizarre and irreverent. All the characters in the Bardo have distinct appearances that relate to when they were alive or how they died. So Roger Bevins III experienced the world intensely while he was alive. He was one of those people who savored beauty in the simplest things. So in the Bardo, he's just a mass of noses and eyes and ears. Hans Wollmann died the day before he was going to have sex with his wife for the first time, and so in the Bardo, he just has a massive erection. There's a part when a group of characters are interrupted in the middle of an orgy, and all of their body positions are described like super precisely and casually. This book really made me laugh at unexpected moments. I've already gone on for too long, and I feel like I haven't even talked about anything. There's so many thoughts in here on the nature of dying and whether we can ever really accept that life has to end, and if there's a way to leave this life without feeling unfulfilled. Their thoughts about memory and love and grief, it's very special. So I've only read 3 of the 13 Man Booker books so far, but it strains belief that there are 6 books on that long list that are better than this one. I just don't believe it. So if this isn't on the short list, I will have a riot of one in the streets. The style will alienate a fair amount of readers, and I think that's fair. You can't predict what you will or won't click with, and with every unconventional book, there's a trade-off. You don't get the traditional character development and plot that you might be craving, so you just have to decide if what you get in exchange is worth it. And in this case, my answer is a resounding yes. And even if yours ends up being a no, I think this is definitely worth a try. Let me know what you think of Lincoln in the Bardo if you've read it or are planning on reading it, and I'll see you soon for another Man Booker review. Bye guys. Thanks for watching.